Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's Southern California program titled Also on View, Unique and Unexpected Museums of Greater Los Angeles. And thank you, as always, for joining us here at Pasadena Heritage in the beautiful, historic Blinn House. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California. It's my pleasure to welcome you and host tonight's program. For those of you that are new to us, new to the book club, we are a nonprofit member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition, finely made books. We have a scholarly journal called the Quarterly Newsletter, and we have keepsakes for our members. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs, like the one this evening, on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed, and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining or rejoining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to check us out online at bccbooks.org to join the book club, or to donate, or just to find out more. Now, tonight's program, again, is titled Also on View, Unique and Unexpected Museums of Greater Los Angeles. And our speaker is Todd Lerew. Todd Lerew is the Director of Special Projects for the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, where he curates eclectic exhibitions and programs in support of the Los Angeles Public Library. He is also a composer of experimental music and inventor of acoustic instruments, such as the quartz cantabile, which converts heat into sound. He was the winner of the 2014 American Composers Forum National Composition Contest and has had his work performed across the US and Europe. He received the 2022 National Outstanding Eagle Scout Award. It's my favorite fact about him. The 2022 National Outstanding Eagle Scout Award, and he has served as a volunteer fire lookout in the San Bernardino National Forest since 2016. And he hasn't even started to present yet. He's getting all of this. He holds a BFA from Hampshire College and an MFA from Cal Arts. And for the bookish people out there, he collects library cards, pictorial maps, and all-black postcards that claim to depict a certain location at night. Crazy. Tonight, Todd will speak about his book, Also on View, Unique and Unexpected Museums of Greater Los Angeles. So, Also on View celebrates LA's most fascinating and underappreciated collections, from the deeply culturally significant to the highly specific and unusual. There are more than 750 museums in the greater Los Angeles area. He's going to talk about every single one of them. Many of them lie beyond the beaten path and may not be familiar to even the most seasoned explorers. Also on View also presents an unparalleled survey of all the diversity and wonder that Los Angeles has to offer. And the book is here and it is available, and it's going to be in the back at the end of the presentation if you're interested in checking it out. Now, if you have any questions for our speaker, please wait until the end of the presentation. We're going to have time at the end to do a little Q&A, and we'll get you to raise your hands when we get to that point. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Todd Lerew.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for the generous introduction and for you and the club's work to have me here today, and Pasadena Heritage for having us in the beautiful Blinn home. And thanks again to all of you for being here to learn about this project, which has been a big labor of love for a number of years, and I'm excited to be able to share it with you all this evening. So I like to start with this road sign, which has been kind of encapsulates my experience for this project over the last number of years. I always joke that I would add a few more arrows in other directions as well. So I've been really interested in unique, kind of obscure and unusual sites and artistic creations for most of my life, you could say. And when I moved here in 2012 for the master's degree that was mentioned in music, on the side I was spending a lot of my spare time exploring unique and amazing places. And even before I moved to Los Angeles, of course, I had to make a pilgrimage to one of the most famous, when you are speaking of this topic, which is the Museum of Jurassic Technology in Culver City. Has anybody, I hope many of you have been there, yes? For anyone that hasn't, it's really hard to describe, and it's usually best if you go without learning too much about it, but this is a view of the rooftop courtyard and aviary. They have countless wonderful exhibitions, and if you haven't been very recently, they also have newer projects such as this 2-level medieval bestiary exhibition that they've produced with the wonderful Mexican muralist, and an even more recent exhibition highlighting Islamic architecture. That's very much worth checking out. So I'm a little biased now, actually, because I ended up marrying one of their former collaborators who built some of the dioramas, Bridget Marin. But it's a wonderful place. It's close to my heart and very much sort of set the tone for this kind of exploration of this vast metropolis. Other kinds of folk art environment type places that I would seek out are like this example, the Rubel Castle up in Glendora, which again is just such a spectacular place. There's really nothing like it. Michael Rubel was a character that I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to meet, but he inspired several generations of his friends and family members and kids from the community to help build this gigantic castle in the shell of a former cistern that provided water for the orange groves that had since disappeared to make way for development. And you see the portcullis that raises automatically there. On the horse is Bonnie Asa, one of the former residents whose dad and now brother have served as the castle blacksmiths. And it's a wonderful community that's now organized. It's actually was donated to the Glendora Historical Society and is operated by them, and there are tenants who live in the apartments within the castle. And I hope if you do go, you're able to get a tour with Scott Rubel, the nephew of Michael Rubel, who grew up helping to build the castle and has days worth of incredible and hilarious and unbelievable stories from that time in his life, and is a wonderful keeper of those. And he's sitting here in the Bottle House, which was the first structure built by Michael. I could give a whole talk on Rubel Castle, but there's a historic packing house on the property that Michael was living in, one of the refrigeration units. His mother and grandfather were also living there, and his mother was known for her wild parties. And to get away from the parties, he took the cast-off bottles and built himself this little bottle house in the courtyard of the cistern. So that started off the kind of building craze. And being able to meet people like Scott is certainly one of the great joys of this project and going around to explore and find unique and amazing sites. Meanwhile, after grad school, I was lucky enough to meet and get to work with our former president of the Library Foundation, Ken Brecker, who became a real mentor to me. And I started off there mainly helping to produce projects that we would bring outside curators and producers to create. But after a few years, he knew that I was spending all of my spare time exploring hundreds of unique sites and small museums throughout the region. And with no experience or really right to do so, he assigned me the task of curating a large-scale exhibition on the topic of collecting. And this is a view of that exhibition in the Getty Gallery at the LA Central Library downtown. It was called 21 Collections, opened in 2018. It had things like, you see the candy wrappers on the right, that's part of the Candy Wrapper Museum, a collection of Darlene Lacey, who's based out in the Inland Empire. It's an online museum, but it really shows like a lot of mostly 20th century culture and history. Surprisingly, a lot of that's wrapped up in the design and the marketing of candy over the years. On the left is a selection of typewriters from Tom Hanks' personal collection. In the middle is a life-size elephant that's completely covered in walnuts, which is actually a recreation that we made to replicate the walnut elephant that was built in 1893 by the LA County Chamber of Commerce for the Chicago World's Fair. So it was a very eclectic exhibition. This is another project that was included. This is a diorama from the African American Miniature Museum, a project of the Compton-based artist Karen Collins. And she has, for several decades, been creating a series of dioramas that explore and celebrate Black history to share it with kids at schools, libraries, as a traveling museum. And she teaches the kids to be docents for each other. And we were able to commission her to create a few new dioramas, including this one of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so when we started, after the pandemic, to work on the book that I'm here to present to you, she was the first person I called to make sure that we'd feature her story. There she is in her living room with her husband, Eddie Lewis, who builds the boxes, and she then makes the dioramas. That's the bulk of their collection, and she's just got such an amazing story and became a close friend of mine, and was really honored to be able to now have this outlet to share and preserve the work and the history that she's creating. One more that I'll mention that was featured in the 21 Collections exhibition were a collection of bird eggs from the Western Foundation of Vertebrate Zoology up in Camarillo. It's the world's second largest collection of bird eggs after the British Museum, and certainly the largest collection of bird nests in the world. In this warehouse space that this nonprofit owns, and that's all they do is research birds, and primarily through the eggs. They've acquired the collections of several natural history museums, including LA and Santa Barbara, and specimens from their collection have been used for all kinds of research projects, including to help demonstrate how the chemical DDT was causing the deformation and destruction of so many eggs and harming those populations, and ultimately served as evidence in the case that had the chemical banned in the US. These are tinamou eggs. They're ultra shiny. They look like candy. That's a favorite of the tour, that they like to pull out that drawer of the many hundreds. And Rene Corrado, who's the collection manager himself, is an incredible story. He came from Guatemala as a young boy, not speaking any English, didn't have any money, and eventually was able to find work working as a gardener for Ed Harrison, who was the founder of this museum. And through their relationship, Ed supported him to learn English, to go back to school for biology, and eventually become the collection manager of this museum. And he's now a national hero in Guatemala and has been given that country's highest honor of the Order of Quetzal. Those are Quetzal birds on his jacket there. And I understand that the Western Foundation of Vertebrate Zoology is in some ways more well-known in Guatemala than it is here in Southern California, which is kind of amazing, but trying to make it more well-known here as well, since it's such an amazing place. So I was, in the midst of the research for the exhibition, I'd already been to about 200 museums throughout the region, and I decided that I should try to locate and visit every single museum throughout greater Los Angeles without realizing what kind of impossible task that would be, although I'm doing pretty good. But one of the biggest problems, which somebody asked earlier, is trying to figure out what should count as a museum and what defines a museum, which I never really had to think too much about, but when you're looking to find every single one and create a more comprehensive listing, then you kind of have to grapple with that issue. And it turns out that there is no agreed upon definition, even within professional museological circles. In fact, there was a kind of hilarious uproar within the International Council of Museums in 2019, where there was a committee that had proposed a new official definition for that body that had some language that other nations didn't appreciate, and they had to go back to the drawing board and come up with something more traditional. But there are, you could say, some fixed criteria that typically apply when you're trying to identify what counts as a museum. And I almost think of it like, if you're familiar with fair use cases and copyright, where you have these ingredients and each one is its own case study where you have to like test it and kind of prove whether you think it should count. And in the case of the museum definition, those criteria might be whether it has a collection. Although for all of these points, there are notable exceptions and a lot of gray area. And I bring up that point first because these two photographs are from Penny Pickle's workshop, which is a children's museum. And most modern children's museums don't have a traditional collection like we think of other types of museums having and caring for. They're primarily play-based learning environments. And of the dozen or so that I've been to throughout the region, this one's by far the most interesting, I felt, because it's imagined as a whole thematic environment. You're entering the home of the fictional Professor Phineas T. Pennypickle, and he's never there. He's off time traveling, and actually the sort of jet-like chair on the left is his time traveling unit, and when you sit in that, it triggers a kind of audio light display that indicates you should crawl through the fireplace into the next room and continue to explore. The bathroom on the right has all kinds of experiments related to hydrology and water and power. So it's play-based, exploration-based, but it's just such a wonderful environment created by Pat Comerchero, who has had an interesting career and has homeschooled her children and now grandchildren and used them as kind of guinea pigs in the exhibition design for all of her new projects at the museum there. Another criteria that comes up a lot is whether it's open to the public. Of course, there's a lot of gray area there as well. Maybe a place is only open by appointment, or it's run by volunteers and their hours are irregular, or it's hard to get a hold of somebody. Maybe they're not open when I expected they would be. This example is the visitor center at the Jet Propulsion Lab, not far from here. And even, I've got a friend who works there, and when we were going there to do the photo shoot, she told me that some of her colleagues took exception to the idea that they had a museum. They didn't think their visitor center should count as one, and they work there. But it sure looks like one to me. It's not open often. They have occasional open houses. It's mostly school groups that are coming in to see it. But it's an amazing collection of not the early period of what became JPL, but the NASA period that started in the 50s and what they mostly operate as today for the sort of research and development branch for all of the rovers and exploratory vessels like these Mars rovers in the foreground. And they have interesting collection pieces like on the left, that's aerogel. It's a solid that is 99.98% air, and a little moon rock encased in a pyramid resin thing for some reason, which is cool to see a moon rock. I also found that some places sort of challenged my understanding of history in really basic ways. I'd been to dozens of historical society museums representing specific little communities, and for the most part, many of them have really unique and interesting things that you can't know unless you go there, which is why I kept going to them, because I loved those surprising experiences that I would have. But the overarching story was often a version of the same thing, talking about the family that lived in this house, talking about the people for whom the streets in the area are named, how many kids they had, the sort of typical implements of the Victorian era, and have you ever seen a toaster that looks like this before, that kind of thing. Which is fascinating, and it's really cool to see all those things and hear those stories. But this place really opened my eyes, La Historia Society in El Monte, which is just a block away from the city's official historical society, which is a fabulous historical society that has a lot of wonderful collections from the old lion farm, Gaze, out there. And it's very much worth checking out, but there was a community, primarily the Mexican-American community, that didn't feel that their story was represented. And there were a lot of agricultural camps, Hicks Camp in particular, that a lot of people had fond memories of growing up in, but didn't see themselves represented. And it wasn't necessarily a sort of challenge to that museum that they decided to open their own. Actually, the first reunions and meetings of that community were at the Historical Society, but they really felt, well, we've got other stories that we want to share, and they were able to get a smaller building from the city to open their own space. A few of the objects that they're displaying like the agricultural implements and the United Farm Workers flag there, Native American implements from the Keech Band of Mission Indians who are partners of theirs. So it just got me to think that every museum is in some way limited in its perspective on the world, that there's only a certain number of people or a certain number of communities that can be represented in any given space. And again, I don't say that to talk down on any museum that, although there are many that could be doing more to present and preserve more diverse stories of the area, there's also more people out there who are in a position to take it upon themselves to share and preserve their stories, and that's what I really love to see. This is another place that was very surprising to me, the Museum of the Republic of Vietnam, or South Vietnam, and specifically the branches of military that were fighting against the North and partnering with the American military during that conflict. Of all the military museums that I've been to, they typically don't talk much about Vietnam since we didn't win that one. And everything that I've ever heard about the war as a son of a veteran and as an American is that it was an American war against communism. But this is a community of refugees who were fighting a civil war to protect their homeland, and that's not a narrative that I was really hearing, even when I was trying to research the topic much. So to be able to go and hear their story directly and see pieces like this model ship, which is the actual model that was used in the creation of the junk force fleet that traveled the interior rivers of the naval department there, and it has these eyes painted on the bow, which I was told were intended to ward off evil spirits. Really fascinating, and this is the group of the Corps volunteers, primarily the descendants of veterans from that army and members of the community in the Westminster area where this museum has been housed. They're actually moving now into a larger space, so it's not one that you can visit at this moment, but we'll look forward to them reopening and sharing their story again. This is a really wonderful place, the Raymond M. Alf Museum of Archaeological Collections at the Webb Schools in Claremont. Has anybody been to this one?
Yeah.
One or two? Wonderful. It's the only nationally accredited museum on a high school campus in the whole country, and it goes back to, I think, the 30s, I don't have the date handy, when Ray Alf, who was a beloved longtime educator, started taking students out on excavation trips into the desert Southwest. And on an early trip to the Barstow area, one of the students who was part of the club and the son of the founder of the school slipped on a rock and tore his pants on what turned out to be the jaw of a type of pig or peccary that was at that point not known to Western science. And so that peccary has become the mascot of the school. That's what you see in the mosaic above the entryway, which for the fans of Millard Sheets in the audience, you'll recognize that as his work, and actually he designed the whole building because his son was a member of this program. And it's a wonderful round building with the local Claremont potato, as they call these stones, from the foothills out there. And the Peccary Society, which is what the club of student archaeologists came to be known as, continues to this day. They're still going out on regular excavation field trips. There's a few members of a recent class on the left with the director of the museum, Andy Farkey. And on the right, you see, or more center, this gigantic piece of sandstone from Seligman, Arizona, which has these petrified trackways of various ancient creatures, and tracks and trackways are one of the hallmarks of their collection. Wonderful place to check out. I had to throw in the Finnish Folk Art Museum since it's so nearby. Who's been there? Yeah, okay. I don't need to talk about it too much then. Of course, it's on the campus of the Pasadena Museum of History, which is a wonderful museum in itself, but the Finlandia Foundation, which primarily oversees this tupa, or traditional style home in the back, is such a wonderful time capsule of Finnish traditional culture. This isn't even stuff that you would see anywhere in Finland within the last century, so it's really interesting. And apparently there was a UCLA professor, Inri Rank, who was sent to Finland and collected all these objects, primarily from the coastal region called Ostrobothnia. And I know that they have a sauna in this building, and I'm waiting for them to get it operational again and hoping they'll let me come join them for a steam. You don't see that at most museums. This and another one like it are two really amazing kind of examples of places that you wouldn't expect to normally be able to see. The Metropolitan State Hospital in Norwalk, and likewise the Patton State Hospital out in the Highland San Bernardino area, which are two of the 5 remaining massive several hundred acre campuses in the state mental health system, which at one time in the early 20th century, they basically operated as independent micro-cities. And the people who were there for treatment were also in charge of many of the work programs. They helped construct buildings even, they ran the kitchens, they had all kinds of craft initiatives. And the 2 museums on either campus are both housed in former staff housing in these kind of bucolic looking homes on the campus. And they dive into the history of the communities and the treatment methods, like this hydrotherapy tub out at Patton, where people would be submerged and exposed to extreme temperature water in a treatment that's thankfully no longer used. But they really talk about the evolution of trauma-informed care that they're offering now. But since the 80s, the numbers have declined because they basically kicked out anybody who wasn't there by court order. So it's a really kind of complicated and fascinating history, and an interesting way to be able to peek behind the scenes of places that you drive by but sort of feel scary or forbidden if you're not taking the time and talking to the people who actually work there and have the direct experience. Down in Orange County is my favorite surfing museum, and it's been referred to as the Smithsonian of Surfing, I think rightfully so, the Surfing Heritage and Cultural Center. This is Dick Metz at age 95, one of the founders of the museum, and he his life sort of tracked with the development of modern surfing. So as a young boy in I think Laguna, he was seeing some of the earliest boards that were being made out of redwood planks that were hundreds of pounds, and you would just leave it on the beach because there was no reason to try to lug it home, and was involved in the sort of commercial boom throughout the 20th century, and was running a bunch of surfing supply stores in California and Hawaii, and all the famous surfers across the generations were friends of his, and he would offer to take their old boards off their hand to display in the rafters just for fun and give them a t-shirt or something. And by the 80s, realized that they had value and that people were interested in this history. So they've been able to open an amazing museum there, even as somebody who cannot surf and is not about to try. But really a place worth checking out. This is an exhibit they have there of the Shape Shack, which is what they call the people who make surfboards. Dale Velzy was a famous surfboard shaper, and this is his shop with the pieces that were unfinished when he died. And the shoe, where you see the dripping of the resin that they would wax the boards with. Kind of amazing to see that. Coming back downtown LA, the Bureau of Street Lighting maintains a small museum in their office building. You have to go kind of past the cubicles to a room where they've laid out a counterclockwise chronological display of a few dozen of the, I think, 400 plus different designs of street lights throughout just the city of Los Angeles. That's Miguel Sangalon, the director of that city department. This one's another one that's nearby, Lizzie's Trail Inn in Sierra Madre. Folks been to that one? A few. It's really worth checking out. They narrowly escaped destruction in the Eaton fire. Of course, we did lose a number of places, as you all know, like most famously in this area, the Bunny Museum was a huge loss, but thankfully this place survived, and it's just a wonderful time capsule of a place that going back to the late 19th century was a kind of providing refreshments for hikers heading up into Mount Wilson, and then was taken over by Lizzie, who it's named for, who was an amazing character who spoke 9 languages and was brewing moonshine and coordinating sexual dalliances in the motel behind the cafe here. So amazing personal story that she has, and the fact that this environment is preserved, although I wouldn't mind having a beer here, that's no longer possible, but the local historical preservation society there is doing a great job to keep that collection and environment alive. The Mousley Museum out in Yucaipa had something that to me is one of the best examples of why it was so worth going around to museums where I had no idea what they might have and would just drop in and see what it was. And it's the story of this woman, Nan Songer, who's known as the Spider Lady of Yucaipa, who during World War II developed a method for, she called it silking. So she was able to sort of pin down safely and tickle black widow and other poisonous spiders to extract the silk threads that they would weave to sell to mostly the government to use as bomb sites, because it was much more reliable and resistant to temperature and humidity variations than hair, for example. Now they use synthetic materials, but she was the only person who was able to provide specified strength and thickness of this silk, and had a kind of factory going in her home for a number of years. And they have those glasses that she used with the sort of yucca stalk extensions, and the yucca piece that she's pinning it to, and this sort of spinneret thing that she's twisting the thread around. Unfortunately, some places, nothing lasts forever, and in my research, I found almost 200 museums in Greater Los Angeles that have come and gone. This is one that we featured in the book that sadly has closed, the Graber Olive House in Ontario. They are a multi-generational family business and a real Inland Empire institution that have been, providing olives using the same equipment from the 1930s. And the vat room here, these concrete vats where they would steep them in a salty brine for a number of weeks, and then they go on to the canning machines. And it was an amazing operation that you'd get to actually see happening during the canning season in the fall. But they had to sell their grove in the Central Valley a few years back, and then just a couple years ago, they were still leasing it, but they had a bad weather year and didn't produce. And then they apparently haven't been able to reopen. And I just learned that they put the lot on the market, unfortunately. Although it is landmarked, so we'll see what happens. Hopefully, at least the structures and equipment can be preserved. But it's hard to imagine somebody coming in and getting the business back up and running the way it's been for over 100 years. So that covers many of the examples that we've featured. You'll notice the photography is exceptional in most cases there. I was really honored to be able to work with Ryan Schutte, an amazing photographer. We spent 2 years going around to shoot all 64 museums that were featured in the book. But throughout my research, I was able to identify close to 800 museums, as was mentioned. So it was only a small fraction that we were able to feature in this publication, but we wanted to make sure that there was a way for people to reference this list. So we built a website, everymuseum.la, and it has a wonderful interactive map. There's bookmarks in the back that have a link to it that you can take as well. So I think we'll leave the last number of minutes for questions, but again, I should also call out Elliot from Angel City Press in the back. They've been really wonderful to work with to be able to bring this creation to life, and it's just been an honor to be in a position to share so many wondrous and amazing stories of places and people that deserve to be shared. So thank you all for listening, and happy to chat further.
I'm not going to stand in front of the QR code. So take a picture of the QR code. It's also, as Todd said, it's on these bookmarks that are in the back. You can grab a couple of these if you don't want to grab that off of the screen. Let's take some questions. Does anybody have any questions for our speaker? Sure.
How do you separate a large museum from a small museum?
There's definitely not a clear boundary like with anything. When you try to get into being comprehensive, actually one of the biggest museums by area that is featured in the book is the Southern California Railway Museum, which is about 100 acres and has a magnificent collection of old trains and trolleys, including a lot of the Pacific Electric red cars. But it's not well known in the greater Los Angeles area. It's mostly volunteer run, although they've definitely got some of the most dedicated volunteers I've ever met, some of whom have been there for 60 plus years. But they don't have a major endowment, they don't have a huge number of paid staff, but it's certainly, and they don't have a lot of marketing behind their operation. So I don't know that there's a clear answer to that, but certainly I can say that the more mainstream institutions that do tend to get regular ongoing press, in which most people who are trying to come up with a list of local museums would only come up with maybe the same 20 over and over again. My focus in this project, and just in my personal interest, has been that they don't need the help, I guess. So the more unique and unusual stories are the ones that I'm interested in preserving. But the website itself contains museums of all sizes, big and small.
Sure.
Is there maybe a golden age of museums in LA, and are there new museums opening? And if so, do they have a different sort of direction or theme?
Golden age is a good question. I don't know that there is. I mean, there have been museums opening and closing as far back as there are records of. It certainly picked up a lot once the population exploded from the 20s on, and then you get better documentation of things from like magazines from mid-century. I'd be hard pressed to say there's a golden era, but yeah, I haven't really mapped it out to say definitively. There are new museums opening all the time. The most recent we featured in the book is the Compton Museum of Art and History that opened in 2023. And within the city limits of Compton, that's basically a museum desert, you could say. The only other thing within city limits was an aeronautical museum at the small Woodley Airport, but nothing related to the local history or culture more broadly. People continue to open museums seemingly faster than they close. So the list keeps growing. Of course, there's some high-profile examples under construction right now, but El Sereno has a historical museum that's a pop-up this month that I'm hoping we'll see get extended. There's new things happening all the time, and I guarantee that there are more that I haven't found yet that are out there as well.
I remember working on a book years ago. Somebody had cataloged halls of fame. Now, are those not included in the museum, or
Yeah, I mean, that halls of fame would definitely probably fit into the gray area. I can't think of too many local examples of that. There are a couple like athletic halls of fame, like at USC. That one I have included here because it kind of looks like a museum to me. The UCLA Athletics Hall of Fame pretty clearly is one. They have like John Wooden's office preserved, and many, many other displays of equipment and stories of famous students who became famous athletes. It's tricky. The other sort of big gray area is with regards to college galleries, community art spaces. If you look at college galleries alone, a number of them have museum in the name, whereas others that function in an identical fashion, if you ask, they will say we're a gallery. Having a collection, there's Kunsthalles, which are non-collecting art museums like the ICA LA, formerly the Santa Monica Museum of Art. So I'm not really, at the end of the day, I try to be inclusive for the purpose of this list and project, because mostly people like to know that places exist, and I'm not really here to be a gatekeeper for the term, but it certainly has been a challenge. And if you know of any other interesting halls of fame, I'd be curious to check them out.
As a follow-up to that, how about archives? I'm an archivist, and I'm wondering if archives?
Archives, special collections, libraries are part of this continuum of, history keepers and sharers. My day job, as was mentioned, is for the Library Foundation of Los Angeles at the LA Public Library. Some people even say the LA Central Library is a museum, and we certainly like to think that we produce museum quality exhibitions, but I don't consider it to be one. I think there has to be more of a focus on the exhibition and the curatorial side, whereas more strict archival projects leave that to others who might be coming to do research, and it's more on the preservation and access side of the equation.
Susan.
Well, I worry about both archives and museums that have been sort of nurtured along by volunteers and so on, and finally can't continue. And I don't know the story behind why the California Organization of History is now not in San Francisco and is at Stanford, and you can't just go in and request stuff in the way we used to be able to request stuff. Or any other small nonprofit museum or archive that these are great, that have collections that have been so carefully and lovingly built up are going to disappear. And I just hope there's some funding to get them to a place they can be preserved.
Yeah, I can't speak to the specific example you raised, which was based in San Francisco, that I also heard closed. Do you have any information about it?
California Historical.
Right, yeah.
That's what I meant.
I will say, from my anecdotal research that I've done, the institutions that are at the greatest risk are those that are created and maintained by a single person. If it's an individual's life passion project, it's extremely unlikely that when they're gone, somebody else will take it on to the same degree. If they're lucky, there might be a larger institution that's able to acquire that. But nonprofit archival or collecting institutions like historical societies, which almost universally will tell you that they're worried that there isn't enough young blood or newer members coming in. But as far as I can tell, they've had that same concern for decades. And it seems to be that people are retiring and getting involved at just the right rate to keep it going. And enough people will step up when it's clear that there is a real threat in many cases. Now, of course, archives are not always kept, and that is always heartbreaking to see when those are lost or if access is no longer possible. I don't know of any centralized answer to that, but there are things like the Archive Bazaar that meets annually at USC, which is a kind of LA's subject is the organizing institution, which kind of allows all the different collections and museums to come together and share resources and problems. I know the State Library has grants for digitizing at-risk collections. And there are probably some others that I'm less aware of, but yeah, it's definitely a concern.
One last question.
Todd,
Steve.
is it established what is LA's oldest museum?
There are two contenders for this, and it's the Southwest Museum or the Natural History Museum, which was opened as the County Museum of Art, Science, and History. I think the Southwest Museum was established first, but the building at the Natural History Museum opened before the Southwest. So, and now the Southwest, merged with the Autry and is basically closed as they're trying to find a new steward for that site. But that's typically considered LA's first museum. I haven't really heard natural history make any big claim to being the first, but there were a number that followed not long after that are also long since gone.
You want to do another question?
I just want to add to that, as sad as we are to lose the Southwest, this was a good match in that I recently worked at the new Autry Library on the Loomis diaries, and they are being beautifully preserved.
Oh, yes.
And easily accessible.
Yeah, they built a wonderful facility called the ARC, the Autry Resource Center. They moved most of the collection there, and it's in a much better place from a conservation and access standpoint, for sure. But the site itself is in limbo.
You can't get into it.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Watching it closely.
I'm going to ask one last question about the book.
Yes.
Okay.
And I was originally going to ask what the process was to take 800-ish museums and only choose 60-something for the book.
Yeah.
And second part is, how did you get Angel City Press to pick up this project and produce this book?
Okay, so, like I said, I was very fortunate to be able to work with Angel City Press. We had, through my day job, we had a history of working with Angel City for a couple projects that we produced over the last number of years, highlighting special collections at the library. The first one, which was before my time, highlighted our sheet music collection. When I started, we were doing a big project on our menu collection, and the third in that trilogy was our unique autograph collection. They've also published a wonderful book about Central Library. So there was a deep tie, and I knew them professionally, but kind of pitched it as an author, and they supported the idea, so I was very happy to see that. And then the kind of fortuitous side of that story, as some of you might be aware, is that Angel City Press was a private company run by Patty and Scott, and they retired and donated the company to the LA Public Library. And it took city attorney several years to figure out how that was going to work legally, but they sorted it out, and it's now Angel City Press at the Los Angeles Public Library, which is a wonderful partnership, and they've always been the kind of premier publishers of local history, art, and culture, and that certainly aligns with the public library's mission as well. In terms of the selection, it's not easy, but originally I wanted to feature 100 museums, because that sounds like a nice number. But before we started, it was clear that we didn't have enough pages. It would just be too expensive to include that many. So we settled on 75, but after 2 years of photo shoots and reaching out to people, trouble scheduling, some wouldn't get back to me, this is sort of where it landed. But we did at least try to ensure that it has a great deal of diversity of subject matter, of types of situations and collections and target audiences, and geographical as well.
So it's a beautiful book, and it's available in the back, and you're going to go back.
I will sign them, and I look forward to continuing the conversation, and thank you so much again for coming out.
Again, another round of applause for our speaker, Todd Lerew. And a big round of applause for you for coming out tonight to see us all here at Pasadena Heritage. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you next month for our monthly program here in Southern California. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Kevin at bccbooks.org. If you want to reach out to me, please do. Thanks everyone.